Please don't drive or operate heavy machinery while listening to this sleep audio. Tonight we visit the Theater of Dreams. The old movie theater sat at the edge of town, half forgotten and shrouded in mystery. The Orpheum, as its rusted marquee proclaimed in faded letters, had been closed for decades. Dust clung to the cracked windows, and the once glorious facade now sagged with age. Yet despite its decay, the theater exuded an unexplainable pull, an aura that whispered of magic and secrets. Nora had heard about the Orpheum from her grandmother, who often told tales of its golden days. They say it was the grandest theater in the region, her grandmother would begin, her voice tinged with nostalgia. But there was something peculiar about it, too. People claimed the movies they watched weren't just stories. They were their dreams brought to life. Nora dismissed the stories as fanciful exaggerations. Dreams on a screen? The idea seemed absurd. But tonight, a sleepless night, after an exhausting week, her feet carried her to the Orpheum without conscious thought. The moon hung low, casting a silvery glow over the theater's crumbling walls. The air was cool, and the streets were eerily quiet, as if the world had conspired to make this moment hers alone. The front doors, once grand and gilded, were now weathered wood, their brass handles tarnished. Nora reached out tentatively, expecting them to be locked, but they swung open with a soft groan. The scent of time, dust, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like old candy, drifted out. The lobby was frozen in time. Velvet ropes sagged between tarnished brass stations, and a concession stand stood empty, its glass cases cracked, but still holding the faintest scent of popcorn. Posters of long-forgotten films adorned the walls, their colors faded, but their titles bold. Dreamscape Serenade, Through the Fog, and The Sleeping City. "Hello," Nora called out, her voice echoing faintly in the cavernous space. No one answered, but a soft light glimmered at the end of the hallway, drawing her in. At the far end of the lobby was a single door, its frame carved with intricate patterns of stars and clouds. Above it, a sign flickered to life as she approached. Now playing, Dreams of the Heart. The letters rearranged themselves as she watched, morphing into something personal. Now playing, The Dreams of Nora Fields. Her breath caught. How did the theater know her name? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but her curiosity outweighed her fear. She pushed the door open and stepped into the auditorium. The theater was grand, even in its dilapidated state. Rows of plush red seats stretched toward a towering screen, framed by heavy curtains. A faint golden light illuminated the space, casting long shadows. Dust danced in the air, stirred by an unseen breeze. Nora chose a seat in the middle row, the cushion sighing softly under her weight. As soon as she settled, the lights dimmed and the screen came alive. This wasn't a typical movie. The images on the screen were familiar, hauntingly so. The scene began in a meadow, vibrant with wildflowers. Nora recognized it immediately. It was the meadow from her favorite childhood dream, where she had spent countless nights chasing fireflies and listening to the gentle hum of the wind. The dream unfolded with startlingly clarity, every detail perfectly preserved. She could almost feel the soft grass beneath her feet, the cool breeze on her face. Her heart raced as the dream shifted. Now she was on a beach at sunset, the waves lapping at the shore. A figure stood in the distance, silhouetted against the golden sky. It was a dream she hadn't had in years, but remembered vividly. The figure never turned around, and she never got close enough to see their face. As the scenes played out, Nora felt an odd sensation, a tug at the edges of her consciousness, as though the screen wasn't just showing her dreams, but drawing them out of her. The line between memory and reality blurred. She could hear the whisper of the waves, smell the salt in the air. The dream shifted again. This time, she was in a room filled with books, their spines glowing faintly. She ran her fingers over them, and the titles changed beneath her touch. One book, thicker and more worn than the others, caught her eye. She reached for it, but the screen went dark before she could open it. "Enjoying the show?" a voice said, startling her. Nora turned to see an elderly man standing at the end of her row. He was dressed in an old-fashioned usher's uniform, complete with a red jacket and brass buttons. His eyes twinkled with a knowing light, and his smile was kind. "Who are you?" she asked. "Just the caretaker," he said. "This theater has been waiting for you." "For me? Why?" The man gestured toward the screen, which flickered back to life. "The Orpheum doesn't show just any dreams. It chooses those whose stories need to be seen, whose hearts carry questions only their own dreams can answer." Nora frowned. "That doesn't make any sense. These are just dreams, memories." "Dreams are never just anything," the man replied. "They're the language of the soul. They reveal truths, hidden fears, forgotten joys." He paused, his gaze softening. "Sometimes they show us what we're searching for." Nora looked back at the screen. A new dream had begun, one she didn't recognize. She was standing at a crossroads, the path shrouded in mist. Signs pointed in every direction, but the words were blurred and unreadable. She hesitated, unsure of which way to go. "Why am I seeing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's for you to discover," the caretaker said, "but be careful. Dreams can be persuasive." "What do you mean?" The man's smile faded. "Sometimes people get lost in them. They forget the waking world and lose themselves in what might have been." A chill ran down Nora's spine. "How do I know what's real?" The caretaker didn't answer. Instead, he tipped his hat and disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone in the flickering light of the screen. Nora watched as the dream on the screen changed again, shifting into something darker, a stormy sea, the waves crashing violently. A small boat struggled against the tide, its lone occupant barely visible. She leaned forward, her heart pounding. Was this a dream of her future, a warning, or something else entirely? The Orpheum seemed to hum around her, alive with energy. For the first time, she wondered if coming here had been a mistake, but as the next dream began to play, she couldn't bring herself to leave. The screen beckoned, and she couldn't look away. Nora gripped the armrests of her seat as the storm on the screen grew more violent. The tiny boat was tossed like a toy in the churning waves, its occupant clutching the sides for dear life. The storm was too vivid. Each flash of lightning seemed to sear the image into her mind. She could almost hear the roar of the thunder, feel the salt spray on her face, and then suddenly she was no longer in her seat. She was on the boat. The cold wind whipped her hair, and the wooden planks beneath her feet groaned under the weight of the waves. The horizon was obscured by darkness, and the sea seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. She gasped, gripping the edge of the boat to steady herself. The storm was no longer something she was watching. She was in it. "Hope!" she shouted into the void. her voice lost in the hollowing wind. A flash of lightning illuminated the figure she had seen earlier, a silhouette at the other end of the boat. They were cloaked in shadow, their face hidden beneath the hood. Nora staggered toward them, each step a battle against the rocking vessel. "Who are you?" she called out. "What's happening?" The figure turned, and for a moment she thought she might finally see their face. Just as the hood began to fall, the boat tilted violently, and she was thrown into the icy water. The shock of the cold stole her breath. She struggled to keep her head above the surface, but the waves were relentless, dragging her under again and again. Her limbs grew heavy, and darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Just as she felt herself slipping away, a hand grasped hers, pulling her upward with impossible strength. She broke through the surface, gasping for air, and found herself back in the theater, sprawled across the velvet seat. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her clothes were dry, but the memory of the cold lingered on her skin. "You're beginning to understand," the caretaker's voice came from behind her. She turned sharply, her breath hitching. The old man stood in the aisle, his expression unreadable. "What just happened?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "I was there. I could feel it." He nodded slowly. "The Orpheum doesn't just show dreams, it lets you live them. To truly understand what they mean, you must walk through them yourself." "That wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare," Nora said, her hands trembling. "Why would it show me that?" The caretaker's gaze softened. "Dreams and nightmares often walk hand in hand. Sometimes the darkest dreams hold the brightest truths." He gestured toward the screen, which had gone dark. "But it's not the storm you should fear. It's what lies beneath." Nora frowned. "What do you mean?" "You'll see," he said cryptically, before vanishing into the shadows once more. She slumped back into her seat, her mind racing. What had she gotten herself into? This theater wasn't just showing her dreams, it was drawing her into them, forcing her to confront them in ways she didn't understand. She wanted to leave, to escape the suffocating weight of the Orphean's secrets, but a part of her couldn't walk away. Not yet. The screen flickered to life again, and this time the scene was calm. A dense forest bathed in twilight. The air shimmered with a golden hue as though the sun was caught between setting and rising. A narrow path wound through the trees, its destination hidden by the thick canopy. Nora hesitated, but felt an inexplicable pull. She stepped toward the screen, and once again, the boundary between dream and reality dissolved. She found herself standing at the edge of the forest, the scent of pine and earth filling her lungs. The path stretched before her, inviting but foreboding. She glanced over her shoulder, hoping for a glimpse of the theater, but it was gone. She was alone. With no other choice, she began to walk. The forest was silent, the only sounds her footsteps crunching against the leaves and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. As she moved deeper into the woods, the air grew colder and the light dimmed. Shadows lengthened, twisting into strange shapes that seemed to reach for her. She came to a fork in the path, marked by an ancient stone. Symbols were carved into its surface, runes she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. The left path promised familiarity, a return to places she knew. The right path, however, beckoned with mystery, an unknown destination that tugged at her curiosity. Her hand brushed the stone as she deliberated, and a whisper echoed in her mind. "Choose wisely, for this path is your own." Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped onto the right path. The forest seemed to hold its breath as she moved forward, the trees closing in around her. The golden light faded entirely, replaced by a silvery glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The path opened into a clearing, and then in the center stood a towering mirror. Its surface shimmered like water, reflecting not her image, but fragments of her dreams, scenes from the meadow, the beach, the storm. As she approached, the reflection shifted, showing moments she had forgotten, her childhood laughter, her tears on a lonely night, the face of someone she had loved and lost. She reached out, her fingers grazing the surface of the mirror. The images rippled, and a voice echoed from within. To find the answers, you must step through. Nora hesitated. The caretaker's warning about getting lost in dreams echoed in her mind, but the pull of the mirror was irresistible. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and fell through the glass. The world around her dissolved into a kaleidoscope of light and sound, and then she was standing in a place that defied description. Stars swirled in a vast, endless sky, and the ground beneath her feet glowed softly, as though lit from within. Figures moved in the distance, their forms indistinct but familiar. A single figure stepped forward, their face still hidden. They raised a hand, and the stars above shifted, forming a constellation that shimmered like a map. "You are not lost, Nora," the figure said, their voice echoing with both warmth and sadness. "The path ahead is yours to uncover." Before she could respond, the scene shattered like glass, and she was back in the Orpheum, sitting in her seat. The screen was blank, the room silent. Nora's heart raced as she stared at the empty screen. The dreams weren't just dreams, they were a journey, a puzzle. Somewhere in the threads of her dreams, the answer she sought waited to be found. Nora sat frozen in her seat, her chest rising and falling as she tried to calm her racing heart. The Orpheum was quiet again, but the stillness felt heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Her hands clutched the armrests, and for a moment she wondered if she could even trust the world around her anymore. Was she truly back, or was this another layer of the dream? The screen flickered faintly, but this time it didn't draw her in. Instead, the soft glow illuminated a part of the theater she hadn't noticed before, a small, unassuming door tucked away in the shadows near the far corner of the auditorium. The caretaker's voice echoed in her memory. "The darkest dreams hold the brightest truths." Compelled by an unseen force, Nora rose from her seat and made her way toward the door. Her footsteps were muffled by the worn carpet, and the soft creak of the door as she opened it seemed deafening in the silence. Beyond the door was a narrow staircase, spiraling downward into darkness. She hesitated at the top step. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. Taking a deep breath, she began her descent. The stairs seemed endless, the air growing cooler and heavier with each step. The only light came from faintly glowing symbols carved into the walls, shapes she had seen before in her dreams. A circle intersected by a line, a star encased in spirals, and an eye surrounded by flames. The carving pulsed faintly as if alive, their light guiding her deeper. At last she reached the bottom, stepping into a cavernous room that seemed far too vast to exist beneath the theater. The space was filled with an eerie golden light emanating from a massive object at the center of the room, an ornate circular door made of burnished metal covered in intricate engravings. The symbols on the door shifted and changed as though they were alive. Approaching cautiously, Nora reached out to touch the door. It was cold beneath her fingers, and the engravings shifted again, forming words she could read. "Through this door lies the truth of your dreams. Once opened, it cannot be closed. Are you prepared?" Her breath caught. This was the heart of the Orpheum, the source of its strange power, but was she ready to face what lay beyond? She thought of the storm, the mirror, the figure in the hood. All of it had been leading her here. Before she could second-guess herself, she pressed her hand to the center of the door. It pulsed warmly beneath her touch, and with a deep, resonant groan, it began to open. Beyond the door was a vast expanse of shimmering mist, rippling like water. Shapes moved within it, figures, memories, fragments of dreams. As she stepped through, the mist parted, revealing a scene so vivid it felt more real than her own life. She was back in her childhood home, standing in the small, sunlit kitchen. The smell of fresh baked bread filled the air, and at the table sat her younger self, no more than 8 years old. Across from her was a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Her mother. Nora's chest tightened. Her mother had passed away years ago, yet here she was, alive and vibrant, as if no time had passed. Tears pricked Nora's eyes as she watched the scene unfold. "You have to trust yourself, sweetheart," her mother was saying, her voice soft and melodic. "The answers are always within you, even when you're afraid, even when you feel lost. Remember, you're stronger than you know." Young Nora nodded, her small hands clutching a book. The title was familiar, The Map of Dreams. It was the same book she had seen in the dream with the library, the one she hadn't been able to open. Adult Nora stepped closer, her heart aching. "Mom?" she whispered, though she knew they couldn't hear her. Her mother turned suddenly, as if she had heard. Her gaze locked with Nora's, and her smile widened. "You found your way back," she said, her voice now addressing her grown daughter. "But the journey isn't over. You must go deeper." The scene dissolved, leaving Nora standing alone in the mist again. Before she could process what had happened, the fog began to shift, coalescing into another figure, the hooded one from her earlier dreams. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier this time. The figure stepped closer, and as they did, the hood fell away, revealing a face that took Nora's breath away. It was her, or rather a version of herself, older, wiser, with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "I am you," the figure said, "the part of you that remembers, that knows what you've forgotten." Nora's throat tightened. "What have I forgotten?" "That you have the power to shape your path," the figure said. "You've been wandering, waiting for someone to guide you, but no one else can show you the way. The Orpheum brought you here to remind you of your strength." Nora shook her head. "I don't understand. Why now? Why this place?" "Because you're ready," the figure said simply. "Ready to face your fears, to let go of the past, and to step into the unknown." The mist began to swirl violently, pulling the figure away. "Wait," Nora called out, but it was too late. She was alone again, the door to the Orpheum's secrets closing behind her. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the theater, seated in the same velvet chair. The screen was dark, the room silent, but something had changed within her. She no longer felt like a passive observer of her own life, drifting aimlessly. The dreams had given her pieces of herself she hadn't realized were missing. Rising from her seat, she glanced around the theater one last time. The caretaker was nowhere to be seen, but she felt his presence, his quiet encouragement. As she stepped into the lobby, she noticed the old marquee flickering to life. The words glowed brightly, now playing, "The Journey of Nora Fields." She smiled, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. The Orpheum had shown her the way forward, but the rest of the journey was hers to create. As she stepped out into the night, the first rays of dawn painted the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, Nora felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The morning air was crisp as Nora stepped out of the Orpheum and into the quiet streets. The world seemed unchanged, but something inside her had shifted. The answers she sought weren't all clear yet, but she carried a newfound certainty. The path ahead was hers to shape. The Orpheum loomed behind her, its facade bathed in the soft glow of dawn. As she walked away, she glanced back over her shoulder, expecting to see its crumbling marquee one last time. Instead, the theater was gone. Where the building had stood was now an empty lot, overgrown with wildflowers. She stared, her breath caught in her chest. The Orpheum had vanished as if it had never been there, as though it had existed only for her. Back in her small apartment, Nora sat at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She couldn't stop thinking about the dreams, the mirror, the hooded figure, herself. Every detail felt so vivid, so alive, as if they were more than dreams. They were messages, guiding her towards something she hadn't yet grasped. Her eyes drifted to her journal, sitting unopened on the table. It was a habit she'd let fall away in recent years, pushed aside by the chaos of life, but now it called to her, a reminder of the voice she had silenced. She opened it to a blank page and began to write. At first, her pen moved hesitantly, recounting the events of the night in fragmented sentences, but soon the words flowed freely, as though her subconscious was spilling onto the page. By mid-afternoon, Nora felt restless. She needed to move, to do something to make sense of what had happened. She grabbed her coat and ventured out into the town, the winter air biting at her cheeks. As she wandered, her feet carried her to an old bookstore tucked away on a quiet side street. The sign above the door read, "The Dreamer's Library." She froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was the library from her dream, the place with the glowing books. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside. The scent of aged paper and leather bindings greeted her, and the warmth of the space wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. Rows upon rows of books filled the shop, their spines a kaleidoscope of colors. The atmosphere was serene yet alive, as though the books themselves were humming with energy. "Can I help you?" a voice asked. She turned to see an older woman behind the counter, her silver hair swept into a loose bun. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, as if she knew exactly why Nora was there. "I'm not sure," Nora said honestly. "I think I'm looking for something." The woman nodded knowingly. "Aren't we all?" She stepped out from behind the counter and gestured for Nora to follow her. "I think I have just the thing." Nora followed her to a secluded corner of the shop where a single book sat on a pedestal. Its cover was a deep, rich blue embossed with golden stars. The title shimmered faintly, "The Map of Dreams." Her breath caught. It was the book from her dream, the one her younger self had held at the kitchen table. "Go ahead," the woman said, her voice gentle. "It's meant for you." Nora reached out, her fingers brushing the cover. The book was warm to the touch, as though it was alive. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the first page. It wasn't filled with words, but with symbols, runes like the one she'd seen in the Orpheum. "What does it mean?" she asked. The woman smiled. "The map will reveal itself as you walk your path. It's not about where you're going, it's about what you discover along the way." Nora looked up, her mind racing. "How do you know all this? How did you know I'd come here?" The woman's smile deepened, and for a moment her eyes seemed to shimmer like the screen of the Orpheum. "Some things are meant to be, Nora. Trust yourself. Trust the journey." Before Nora could ask more, the woman stepped back into the shadows of the shop, leaving her alone with the book. She turned the pages carefully, watching as faint lines began to appear, forming a map that seemed to shift in shape with each turn. The map wasn't just guiding her somewhere, it was reflecting her own inner landscape. Each mark, each symbol felt connected to her memories, her fears, her dreams. Clutching the book to her chest, she left the shop, her mind buzzing with questions and possibilities. The woman was gone. The store was empty, as if it had never been there. But the book in her hands was real, and with it came a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. That night, as she sat by her window and watched the stars, Nora opened the map of dreams again. This time, she saw a single glowing path marked on the page, leading to a symbol she recognized, the mirror from the mist. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. With a deep breath, she closed the book and whispered to herself, "I'm ready." The days following Nora's discovery of the map of dreams felt like a haze of wonder and uncertainty. She kept the book close, tucked safely under her pillow at night, and carried in her bag during the day. It was more than a map. It felt alive, shifting subtly whenever she glanced at its pages. The glowing path it revealed was always there, pulsing faintly as if urging her onward. But onward to where? Each time she studied the map, she noticed new details, symbols she couldn't decipher, faint images of places that stirred something deep in her memory. The mirror from the mist remained the most vivid, etched prominently at the map's center, but it was surrounded by other shapes, a key, a tower, a labyrinth. She had no idea what they meant, but something told her she would find out soon enough. On the fifth night, as she sat cross-legged on her bed, tracing the lines of the map with her fingertips, the air in her room shifted. The stillness broke with a faint hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the book itself. Nora's breath hitched as the light on the map intensified, spilling out into her room in a cascade of golden rays. And then, as if summoned by her curiosity, the room around her faded. She was standing in a forest, the same one from the dream she had walked before. The twilight glow was back, casting everything in hues of gold and green. This time, however, the path before her was unmistakable. It shimmered faintly, the same glowing trail she had seen on the map. Nora didn't hesitate. She followed the path, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The trees whispered as she passed, their leaves rustling in a breeze she couldn't feel. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, familiar shapes she couldn't quite place. After what felt like hours, the path opened into a clearing. At the center stood the mirror, tall and gleaming, just as it had been in the mist. Its surface rippled, reflecting not the forest, but a different place entirely, a sprawling desert beneath a sky filled with stars. The air around it seemed to hum with energy. "You found the mirror again," a voice said from behind her. Nora spun around. The caretaker stood at the edge of the clearing, his red jacket gleaming faintly in the twilight. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, as though he was measuring her resolve. "I thought I was done with this," she said, her voice trembling. "Why am I here again?" The caretaker tilted his head. "Because you haven't asked the right question." Nora frowned. "What question?" "The one you're afraid to ask," he said simply. "The one that's been buried in your heart for too long." She looked back at the mirror, her reflection shifting and shimmering within the rippling surface. As she stared, memories began to rise, images of her mother, the storm, the hooded figure. The fragments of her dreams swirled together, forming a question that had been haunting her without her even realizing it. "Why did I lose myself?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The caretaker's gaze softened. "That's the question, isn't it? And the mirror holds the answer, but the truth is not always easy to face." Nora swallowed hard. "I'm ready." "Then step through," he said, gesturing toward the mirror. "But remember, once you cross, you cannot turn back." She hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. As her hand touched the mirror's surface, the world around her dissolved into light. She was in the storm again. The waves crashed against her tiny boat. the wind tearing at her hair and clothes. The hooded figure was there, standing at the bow, her back to her. This time she didn't hesitate. She pushed against the wind, forcing herself to move closer. "Who are you?" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the sea. The figure turned slowly, and Nora's breath caught. It wasn't a stranger beneath the hood. It was her. Not the older version she'd seen before, but herself as she had been years ago, bright-eyed, hopeful, and unscarred by the weight of the world. "You lost me," the younger version of herself said, her voice filled with quiet sorrow. "You let me drift away." Tears pricked Nora's eyes. "I didn't mean to. Life got so hard. I didn't know how to hold on." The younger Nora stepped closer, her expression softening. "You didn't lose me completely. I've been waiting for you to remember, to find your way back." "How do I do that?" Nora asked, her voice breaking. "You already know," the younger Nora said, placing a hand over her heart. "You just have to listen." The storm began to fade, the waves calming as the two versions of Nora stood together. The younger one smiled, her form beginning to dissolve into light. "Don't forget again. You're stronger than you think." And then she was gone. Nora opened her eyes to find herself back in her room, the golden light of the map fading. The book lay open in her lap, the glowing path now complete, leading to the mirror and beyond. She wiped her tears, a deep sense of peace settling over her. The journey wasn't over. There were still mysteries to uncover, challenges to face. But for the first time in years, she felt whole. She reached for her journal and began to write, the words flowing easily. As she wrote, she realized the Orpheum hadn't just been a theater. It had been a doorway to herself, a guide to finding what she had lost. The journey ahead was hers to take, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to step forward, to follow the path wherever it might lead. Nora's pen hovered over her journal, her thoughts racing faster than she could write. She traced the final glowing path on the map, leading to a new symbol, a labyrinth. Its twisting corridors seemed endless, looping back on themselves in intricate patterns. Unlike the mirror, the labyrinth was an unfamiliar element, and yet it stirred something deep within her, a mix of curiosity and dread. She had rediscovered her inner strength, but the map was clear. There was more to uncover. The journey wasn't complete. The next morning, Nora prepared herself. She didn't know where she would end up or how the labyrinth would manifest, but she trusted the map to guide her. Slipping the book into her bag, she ventured out into the quiet streets of the town, her destination uncertain, but her resolve firm. The map seemed to respond to her intent. As she walked, the faint glow beneath its surface shifted, and the symbols grew brighter, drawing her towards an old park at the edge of town. It was a place she hasn't visited in years. Its once thriving gardens now overgrown with vines and wildflowers. At the center of the park, where there had once been a fountain, a stone archway now stood. It was impossibly tall, carved with symbols similar to those she had seen in the Orpheum and on the map. Beyond the archway, the air shimmered faintly, as though the space within it didn't quite belong to the world she knew. Taking a deep breath, Nora stepped through. The labyrinth was unlike anything she had imagined. She found herself standing at the entrance to an immense maze. Its walls formed from towering hedges that stretched high above her. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of earth and greenery. Golden light filtered through gaps in the leaves, casting shifting patterns on the ground. In the distance, she could hear faint whispers. Voices carried on the wind, though their words were unintelligible. The path before her branched into 3 directions, each marked by a stone pedestal bearing an object: a feather, a key, and a compass. Nora approached the pedestals, her fingers grazing each object in turn. The feather felt impossibly light, as though it might float away if she let go. The key was cold and solid, its intricate design glinting in the light. The compass spun wildly, its needle refusing to settle on a direction. A choice. She thought back to her dream of the crossroads, where the signs had been unreadable, but this time she wasn't lost. She had learned to trust herself. Her hand closed around the key. The moment she lifted it, the other objects vanished, and the labyrinth shifted. The path ahead grew wider, illuminated by golden light. She stepped forward, clutching the key tightly. The maze seemed to test her at every turn. Some paths were straight and clear, while others twisted back on themselves, leading her in circles. At times she encountered walls of mist that obscured her vision, forcing her to rely on her instincts to move forward. The whispers grew louder, forming fragments of words. Truth, memory, choice. At one particularly difficult juncture, she came to a dead end. Frustration bubbled within her, and she slumped against the hedge wall, trying to catch her breath. As she did, the key in her hand began to glow faintly. She held it up, and the light revealed an inscription on the wall. To go forward, you must look within. Closing her eyes, Nora focused on her breathing. The labyrinth wasn't just a physical test. It was a reflection of her inner world. The obstacles were her fears, her doubts, her hesitation. If she wanted to move forward, she had to confront them. When she opened her eyes, the dead end was gone. A new path had opened, and at its end was a circular clearing. In the center stood a stone pedestal, similar to the one at the entrance, but this time it held a small, locked chest. Nora approached it cautiously, her heart pounding. The key in her hand pulsed with warmth as she brought it to the lock. It fit perfectly, and with a soft click, the chest opened. Inside was a single piece of paper, worn and yellowed with age. It was blank at first, but as she lifted it, words began to appear, written in the same shifting symbols as the map. Slowly, they transformed into something she could read. You hold the key to your own freedom. The labyrinth ends when you let go of the need for answers and trust the journey itself. The words hit her with unexpected force. She had been so focused on finding answers about the Orpheum, the map, herself, that she had forgotten to simply be. The journey wasn't about solving a mystery. It was about rediscovering the strength to move forward, even in uncertainty. As she stood there, the labyrinth began to dissolve. The hedges faded into golden mist, and the ground beneath her feet grew firm. She was no longer in the maze, but back in the park, standing beneath the stone archway. That night, back in her apartment, Nora opened the map of dreams once more. The labyrinth had disappeared from its pages, replaced by a new symbol, a flame, surrounded by spiraling lines. She didn't know where the map would lead her next, but she no longer felt the need to control it. The Orpheum, the mirror, the labyrinth, they had all been steps along a path of self-discovery, and as she turned out the light and climbed into bed, she felt a quiet confidence that whatever lay ahead, she was ready. The following days felt lighter, as if Nora had shed a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. The map lay on her desk, its new symbol, the flame surrounded by spiraling lines, glowing faintly even in the sunlight. She studied it often, her fingers tracing its edges, but no further paths had revealed themselves. For the first time, she wasn't frustrated by the map's silence. She understood now that the journey unfolded only when she was ready. On the morning of the third day, the map shifted. The spiral around the flame pulsed with light, and a new inscription appeared beneath it. The flame renews what is lost. Seek it within the ashes of the forgotten. Nora sat back, her heart skipping a beat. The cryptic messages no longer unnerved her the way they once had. Instead, they ignited her curiosity. She had seen symbols and clues enough times now to trust that they would guide her. She thought of the words, the ashes of the forgotten. Images flickered through her mind, memories of places she had once known, people she had once cherished. And then it hit her. There was a place in town that fit the description perfectly, the abandoned textile mill at the edge of the river. The mill had been a bustling hub decades ago, before a fire had gutted it, leaving little more than charred beams and crumbling stone walls. As a child, she had been warned to stay away, but she had always been drawn to the site's haunting beauty. It was a place where time seemed to stand still. The mill was exactly as she remembered it, quiet, desolate, and overgrown with vines. The air smelled faintly of burnt wood, even after all these years. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ruins, giving the place an eerie, otherworldly feel. Nora stepped through what had once been the main entrance, her boots crunching over debris. The interior was a labyrinth of fallen beams and jagged walls, but she felt no fear. The map had brought her here for a reason. She wandered through the ruins, her eyes scanning for anything unusual. It wasn't long before she found it, a scorched iron door, nearly hidden behind a tangle of ivy. The door was covered in soot, but its surface was etched with similar to those on the map, with symbols similar to those on the map. At its center was the flame symbol, glowing faintly. Nora's heart quickened. She reached out and touched the door. It was cool beneath her fingertips, but the moment her hand made contact, the air around her seemed to shift. The runes faded, replaced by a new scene. She stood in a circular chamber, bathed in warm, flickering light. The walls were lined with shelves filled with glowing objects, books, trinkets, photographs, all radiating a soft golden hue. At the center of the room was a fire pit, its flames dancing and casting shadows across the space. The ashes of the forgotten, she murmured to herself, stepping closer to the fire. As she gazed into the flames, images began to appear within them. They were fragments of her past, moments she had buried, moments she had lost. She saw herself as a child, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen, listening to stories about the Orpheum. She saw her mother humming softly as she baked bread. She saw herself as a teenager, full of hope and ambition, sketching designs for a future she had once dreamed of, but abandoned. Tears welled in her eyes. These were the pieces of herself she had forgotten, the part she had allowed to fade in the face of life's hardships. The fire was showing her what she had lost and what she could reclaim. "You've carried these ashes with you for too long," a voice said. She turned to see the hooded figure again, but this time they were different. Their face wasn't shrouded in shadow. Instead, it was radiant, glowing like the flames themselves. It was her own face, but transformed, stronger, brighter, filled with a sense of purpose. "Why did I lose these parts of myself?" Nora asked, her voice trembling. "You didn't lose them," the figure said. "You let them rest. But now it's time to breathe life into them again. The flame renews what is forgotten, but only if you are willing to embrace it." Nora nodded, understanding. She stepped closer to the fire, letting its warmth wash over her. She reached out her hand, and the flames leapt toward her, wrapping around her fingers like a living thing. For a moment, she was engulfed in light. When the light faded, she was back in the mill. The ruins were unchanged, but she felt different. The weight in her chest was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. In her hand, she held a small, glowing ember, no larger than a pebble. It pulsed softly, a reminder of the fire she had rekindled within herself. That night, as she sat by her window, she opened the map of dreams once more. The flame symbol had dimmed, but a new one had appeared. A tower reaching into the sky, its spire surrounded by clouds. Beneath it was another inscription. The tower reveals what lies above and below. To ascend, you must first look down. Nora closed the book with a soft smile. Each step of the journey brought her closer to herself, closer to understanding the life she had once let drift away. The flame had shown her the power of renewal, and now the tower called her to ascend. The journey wasn't over, but she was no longer afraid. The path ahead was hers to walk, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The morning broke clear and bright, the sunlight streaming through Nora's windows, as though heralding her next step. She stretched, her fingers brushing against the map of dreams lying open on her bedside table. The latest symbol, a towering spire surrounded by clouds, glimmered faintly. Beneath it, the inscription read, "The tower reveals what lies above and below. To ascend, you must first look down." Nora studied the image carefully. The tower appeared ancient, with spiraling staircases carved into its exterior. Its peak disappeared into swirling clouds, but its base stretched into the earth, vanishing into darkness. The inscription was cryptic, but she had grown used to the map's riddles. Each challenge so far had forced her to confront not only her fears, but also herself. She had learned to trust that the journey would make sense in time. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Nora had no clear sense of where to begin, but her instincts guided her to the outskirts of town, to an area she hadn't visited in years, the old stone quarry. Long abandoned, the quarry was a place of silence and solitude, its jagged walls towering like sentinels over a deep, still lake at its center. As a child, she had heard stories of tunnels hidden within the quarry walls, passageways carved long ago by workers seeking shortcuts or hidden treasures. She had never dared to explore them, until now. By the time she reached the quarry, the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and amber. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of wet stone. Nora paused at the edge of the lake, the surface so smooth it seemed like glass. For a moment, she wondered if she was in the right place. The tower from the map seemed far removed from this quiet, unassuming setting. But as she scanned the quarry walls, something caught her eye, a faint glow emanating from a crevice near the water's edge. The light was golden, the same color as the markings on the map. Her heart quickened. This was it. She scrambled down the rocky incline, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The crevice was narrow, just wide enough for her to slip through. As she stepped inside, the glow intensified, illuminating a hidden tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. The air grew colder as she descended, the golden light casting eerie shadows on the rough walls. The tunnel twisted and turned, its path uneven and littered with debris. After what felt like hours, she emerged into a cavernous chamber. At the center of the chamber stood the tower. It was exactly as it had appeared on the map, an imposing structure of stone and metal, its spiral staircase wrapping around the exterior. The top was obscured by a swirling mist that filled the upper reaches of the cavern, while the base seemed to plunge into a deep abyss. Nora's breath caught at the sight. The inscription's meaning was now clear. The tower was a bridge between two worlds, what lay above and what waited below. She approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The tower's surface was etched with symbols, some familiar from her previous dreams, and others entirely new. At its base was a heavy wooden door, its frame adorned with carvings of stars and spirals. Nora reached for the handle, but before she could touch it, the door swung open with a creak. The interior of the tower was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and stone. A winding staircase spiraled upward, its steps worn smooth by countless footsteps. Another staircase led downward into the darkness below. The choice was clear, to ascend or descend. Her eyes lingered on the upward staircase. It was inviting, its glow warm and beckoning, but the inscription's warning echoed in her mind. To ascend, you must first look down. With a steadying breath, she turned toward the downward staircase and began her descent. The air grew heavier with each step, and the golden glow of the upper levels faded into an eerie darkness. The only light came from faintly glowing symbols etched into the walls, their shapes shifting as she passed. The whispers she had heard in the labyrinth returned, but this time they were clearer, forming fragmented phrases. Remember the weight you carry. To find balance, you must confront what anchors you. Look within and let go. The staircase ended in a vast underground chamber. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not just her image, but scenes from her past. She saw herself as a child, sitting alone on a rainy day, clutching a broken toy. She saw her teenage self, tears streaming down her face after a failed exam. She saw the day she walked away from her dreams, the weight of disappointment etched into every step. The reflections were painful, but they weren't there to torment her. They were reminders of the burden she carried, moments of fear, regret, and self-doubt that had shaped her journey. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, upon which rested a single object, a golden scale. One side of the scale was weighed down with small, dark stones, while the other was empty. A plaque beneath the scale read, "To rise, you must lighten the load. Choose what you will leave behind." Nora hesitated. The stones represented the burdens she had carried for years, the fear of failure, the pain of loss, the doubts that had held her back. Letting them go felt like an impossible task, but she knew it was the only way forward. One by one, she picked up the stones, holding each one in her hands. As she did, the memories tied to them surged forward, vivid and raw. She allowed herself to feel the emotions she had buried: grief, anger, regret, and then, with trembling hands, she placed each stone onto the ground. When the final stone was removed, the scale tipped, and a beam of golden light shot upward, illuminating a hidden staircase that spiraled back toward the surface. The ascent was unlike any she had experienced before. The staircase glowed warmly, and the air grew lighter with each step. She felt as though the weight that had once pressed down on her had lifted, replaced by a sense of freedom and clarity. When she reached the top, she emerged into the upper chamber of the tower. The mist that had shrouded the peak was gone, revealing a stunning view of the cavern below and the glowing paths she had traveled. At the center of the chamber was another pedestal, this one holding a golden orb. The orb pulsed softly, its light reflecting the symbols from the map. When Nora touched it, her vision filled with images: the Orpheum, the mirror, the labyrinth, the flame. Each piece of her journey appeared in perfect clarity, weaving together into a tapestry of meaning. The tower's purpose was clear now. It wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol of her growth, a reminder that she had the strength to ascend because she had dared to confront the depths within herself. As the vision faded, the tower began to dissolve, its stones crumbling into light. Nora found herself back in the quarry, standing at the water's edge. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the landscape. She opened the map of dreams, her heart racing as she saw the next symbol appear, a bridge stretching across an infinite expanse. Beneath it, the inscription read, "The bridge connects what is seen and unseen. To cross it, you must trust the unknown." Nora closed the map, a smile spreading across her face. The journey wasn't over, but she was no longer afraid. Each step brought her closer to understanding, not just of the map or the Orpheum, but of herself. The path ahead was waiting, and she was ready to take the next step. The golden light of dawn filtered through the trees as Nora stood at the edge of the quarry, her fingers tracing the map of dreams. The new symbol, a bridge stretching into infinity, glimmered faintly on the page, accompanied by the inscription, "The bridge connects what is seen and unseen. To cross it, you must trust the unknown." This would be the final step in her journey. She could feel it in her bones. The map had guided her through the Orpheum, the labyrinth, the flame, and the tower, each challenge forcing her to confront parts of herself she had buried or forgotten. Now, standing on the precipice of what lay beyond, she felt equal parts ready and terrified. She began her walk back into town, the map folded carefully under her arm. The streets were quiet in the early morning, the world still waking up. As she approached the old park where her journey had truly begun, she felt the air shift around her, a familiar hum, soft but insistent, like a whispered invitation. At the park's center, a new structure had appeared, a shimmering bridge of golden light. It stretched impossibly far, vanishing into a horizon of swirling mist. The bridge seemed fragile yet unyielding, glowing with an otherworldly radiance. Nora approached it slowly, her heart pounding. Standing at the entrance to the bridge was the caretaker. "Welcome," he said, tipping his hat. His eyes, always kind yet enigmatic, held a deeper understanding now. "You've come a long way, Nora." "I feel like I've been walking forever," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I don't know what's waiting for me on the other side." "No one does," he replied with a gentle smile. "That's the point. The bridge doesn't promise answers, only the chance to step into the unknown. It's a choice only you can make." Nora hesitated. "What if I'm not ready?" The caretaker chuckled softly. "You wouldn't be here if you weren't." He stepped aside, leaving the path before her clear. Nora took a deep breath and stepped onto the bridge. The surface of the bridge was warm under her feet, humming faintly with energy. As she walked, the world around her dissolved into a sea of golden light, the edges of reality blurring and shifting. The mist thickened, curling around her like a living thing. For a moment, fear threatened to overtake her. The ground beneath her feet felt unsteady, and the vastness of the unknown loomed ahead. But then she remembered everything she had learned. The mirror had shown her her past. The labyrinth had forced her to let go of her burdens. The flame had rekindled her inner strength, and the tower had reminded her to balance both ascent and descent. She steadied herself and continued forward. As she walked, the mist began to part, revealing figures in the distance. They were shadows at first, flickering at the edges of her vision, but as she drew closer, they solidified into familiar faces. Her mother, her younger self, the hooded figure from the boat. Her mother stepped forward first, her expression soft and radiant. "You've come so far, Nora," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of home. "But this isn't the end. It's the beginning." Tears filled Nora's eyes. "I miss you," she whispered. "I'm always with you," her mother replied, placing a hand over Nora's heart. "You carry me in everything you do. Never forget that." The figure dissolved into light, and Nora turned to see her younger self standing nearby. The girl looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Are you still afraid?" the younger Nora asked. Nora knelt, meeting her gaze. "I think I'll always be a little afraid," she admitted. "But I've learned that fear doesn't have to stop me. It can guide me, as long as I don't let it control me." The younger Nora smiled and nodded, then stepped back into the mist, leaving Nora alone once more. The bridge continued to shift as she walked, the mist thickening again before revealing a final scene. A door at the end of the path, simple yet imposing. It was carved from dark wood, its surface edged with symbols from the map. Above the door were the words, "To cross, you must leave behind what no longer serves you." Nora approached the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. The whispers returned, louder now, forming a single coherent question. What will you let go of to move forward? She closed her eyes and let the question settle. The weight of the stone she had left in the labyrinth returned to her mind, the fear of failure, the pain of loss, the doubts that had held her back. But there was something deeper she hadn't yet addressed. Her fear of the unknown, her reluctance to trust herself completely. "I'll let go of my need to control everything," she whispered. "I'll trust the path, even when I can't see where it leads." As the words left her lips, the door glowed softly, and the handle turned beneath her hand. On the other side of the door was a vast expanse of light. It wasn't blinding or overwhelming. It was warm, inviting, and filled with infinite possibility. She stepped through, and the world around her shifted once more. She was back in the Orpheum. The theater was no longer crumbling and abandoned. It was vibrant, its marquee glowing brightly, the letters spelled out, now playing, "The path beyond the screen." Inside, the auditorium was full of people, faces both familiar and unfamiliar, all watching the screen with rapt attention. As Nora walked down the aisle, she realized the screen was showing her journey. Each step of her path played out in vivid detail: the mirror, the labyrinth, the flame, the tower, and finally, the bridge. The caretaker appeared beside her, his expression proud. "You've done well, Nora. Is it over?" She asked. He shook his head. "The journey never truly ends, but you've reached a milestone. The rest is yours to write." The screen faded, replaced by a single line of text. "The next chapter begins with you." Nora smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. The Orpheum, the map, the bridge, they had all been tools to guide her, but the real journey was hers to shape. As she stepped out of the theater into the light of a new day, she felt ready. The world stretched out before her, filled with endless possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to take the next step. Months later, Nora found herself sitting at her desk, a blank page in front of her. The map lay beside her, its symbols faint but still alive, as if waiting for her to call upon them again. She picked up her pen and began to write, not about the Orpheum or the map, but about herself. Her journey had taught her that the answers she sought weren't out in the world. They were within her all along. As the words filled the page, she felt the hum of the Orpheum in her chest, a gentle reminder that the path beyond the screen was hers to create. And so she did.